about a year ago, and we kind of told him that he couldn't have a job. And he's held it against us ever since. So basically he likes to harass our groups. If he does come up and start shouting loads of rubbish at you, the trick is just to stay perfectly still because his vision is based on movement. Anyway, once again, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to tell you about this spot on the ground just there. Ladies and gentlemen, it was on those cobbled stones, of course, on the 21st of March, 1556, that the most powerful archbishop of all time was burnt at the stake as a heretic and as a martyr. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the point where I should reveal who that man was. It was a man called Thomas Cranmer. Was anyone here expecting that? No. Never mind. Well, now, ladies and gentlemen, it's time I told you perhaps the most shameful story in all of Oxford's history. And so my story begins with Thomas Cranmer being summoned to Henry VIII. Henry still wanted a divorce from his wife, Catherine of Aragon. Wolsey had let him down, and so it was up to Cranmer to try and secure this divorce once and for all. So, Thomas Cranmer would look to Europe, and of course in Europe at the time, they were going through the Reformation of the Church. Martin Luther had already nailed his 95 treaties to All Saints' Church in Wittenberg. This happened in 1517, and so, ladies and gentlemen, Cranmer, already a supporter of the Reformation, thought, why doesn't England do the same? Why don't we move away from the Catholic traditions and become a Protestant country? It'll be much easier then for Henry to have his divorce, and in fact it'll provide even more power for the king if we implement him as the head of the church here in England. Henry, guess what, loves this idea. Who here was surprised? No, of course. So, Henry will start by closing down all of the monasteries across England and would then send Thomas Cranmer to the Vatican City to tell the Pope we weren't going to be Catholic anymore. But before he even made it to the Vatican City, he was called back here to England to take over the vacant position of Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, ladies and gentlemen, whatever Henry wanted, Thomas Cranmer was able to give him. And in doing so, he would completely rewrite the Book of Common Prayer, translating many holy doctrines of the Catholic Church into English, from Latin into English, and of course, removing the Pope's name from many Catholic doctrines and putting the King's name in its stead, asserting him as the head of the Church here in England. Obviously, good news for Henry, he finally had his divorce. A couple of wives down the line, he finally had the son and heir he had always wanted in the form of Edward, who would go on to become Edward VI. And of course, no surprises, Cranmer was rewarded with power, money, titles and land, to the extent he could only be described as the most powerful archbishop of all time. And then guess what? Henry died. Edward was now the King of England, but at the age of 14, he would suddenly be diagnosed with tuberculosis, and as the illness got worse, it would become more and more obvious he wasn't going to live much longer. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Thomas Cranmer feared for the next in line to the throne, because this was Mary Tudor, the Catholic daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. And ladies and gentlemen, should a Catholic monarch ascend to the throne, things would certainly start to look rather bad for poor old Thomas Cranmer, who had just moved everyone away from Catholicism here in England. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Cranmer, the day that Edward died, threw himself behind a campaign to make Lady Jane Grey the next Queen of England. In fairness to him, he succeeded in this. Jane, the Protestant cousin of Mary, ascended to the throne and remained there for an astonishing 9 days. Didn't last a very long time, as it turned out. Basically, Mary would then storm into the palace, would take the crown by force, crown herself Queen Mary I of England, and would then send poor old Jane to the Tower of London, where, guess what, she had her head chopped off. And then, Mary turned her attention to religion in this country. For a start, she had no time whatsoever for the Protestant Reformation. She was a Catholic and decided to re-establish the Catholic Church here in England once and for all. And so, first she went to Parliament to once again declare it legal to have heretics burnt at the stake as they had been in the times of old. And then she rounded up the three main conspirators behind the state of religion in this country. These were Thomas Cranmer, Bishop Latimer, and Nicholas Ridley, and one by one, these three men were taken to Divinity School, where one by one they were made to argue their beliefs in Latin. One by one, they were found guilty of betraying God himself and were made to sign a document stating their Protestant beliefs were false, and that the only true path to God was through the Catholic Church. And obviously, ladies and gentlemen, these men had not only signed away their faiths, but their lives as well. However, for Thomas Cranmer, it was going to be even harder to have him burnt at the stake. He was, of course, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Only person who had the power to excommunicate him was the Pope. This obviously time before Facebook, Twitter, email, fax and telephone. It was going to take some time. So messengers would ride to the Vatican City as Thomas Cranmer watched from his prison cell, which incidentally was actually just up there. It's actually since been converted into a Debenhams, but yes, it's just up there that he would watch with horror as his friends Bishop Latimer and Nicholas Ridley were dragged to that spot and the fires were made up, ready for them to burn. Now, Nicholas Ridley's brother had with him some gunpowder that he had fashioned into 2 necklaces, so at least as of the point that the fires would reach their necks, their deaths would come fairly quickly. And so the fires were lit, and as they were about to reach his neck, Latimer would turn to Nicholas Ridley, and in his final words did exclaim to him, "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, for we this day light such a candle in this world that I believe in the very faith of God, it shall never be put out." Of course, at this point his words were finally silenced. But for Nicholas Ridley, it was going to be harder for him to play the man. His wood had been freshly cut and was taking twice as long to burn. His friends were actually desperately trying to help him by putting more wood on the fire, but it was having no effect. Poor old Ridley's lower limbs were slowly smouldering away, and so he screamed out to the heavens, "Have mercy on me, Lord, I cannot burn, I cannot burn." It took a staggering 2 hours before finally Nicholas Ridley's words were silenced once and for all. But now the day had come, the 21st of March, 1556, and Cranmer had been excommunicated. He was taken to the university church for one final humiliation in front of his peers and academics at the university. He was once again made to recant his faith, but nay, Cranmer would not stand for one final humiliation, and from his tunic he pulled out a speech he had written in prison, claiming his Protestant beliefs had been right all along, and that so then would he, when he came to burn, would he first offer his hand to the fires that would claim his life. For after all, it had been his hand that had contradicted what he had felt in his heart the day he signed away his faith at Divinity School. The crowd were furious with what they had just heard. They dragged him from the church, beyond the city walls, to that spot where the fires were made up, ready for another martyr to burn. And at the age of 67, Cranmer was tied to the stake and the fires were lit. True to his word, when those fires were high enough, he was able to free his hand and plunge it into the fires that would claim his life. His hand burnt away to nothing more than a stump. And so with this shocking story do we remember those 3 brave men who died for what they believed in perhaps Oxford's most shameful moments. Oh, goodness. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much indeed for coming on the tour. It's been my pleasure. Oh, bless you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodness me.